much for coming, everyone, to Talks at Google today. It's my pleasure to introduce Tali Sharot. Tali is the founder and director of the Affective Brain Lab here at MIT and at University College London, where she's a professor of cognitive neuroscience. She's the author of the award-winning books The Optimism Bias and The Influential Mind, and is a contributor to media outlets including the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, and the BBC. Her popular TED Talk, How to Motivate Yourself to Change Your Behavior, has been viewed over 15 million times. Tali's here today to talk about her new book, Look Again, The Power of Noticing What Was Always There, co-authored by Kassar Sunstein. Look Again explores all the ways that our brain's ability to habituate to novel experiences over time affects our behavior, our perception of the world, and ourselves. We'll be doing some audience Q&A at the end of the talk, so if you're joining us via the live stream, please feel free to submit your questions. And please join me in welcoming Tali Sharot.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. So it's a pleasure to be able to chat a little bit about Look Again. And really, the book starts with this puzzle, which is we all have some good things in our life. Perhaps it's a loving relationship, an interesting job, or a comfortable home. But those things seem to have relatively limited impact on our daily happiness. And on the same end, there are some horrible things around us, perhaps sexism, racism, cracks in our personal relationships, inefficiencies at the workplace. But over time, we just get used to those things. We stop noticing them, and if we stop noticing them, we don't try to change. So today I'm going to share with you what we've learned about why this happens and what can we do to regain sensitivity, both to the good things in life, so we can feel the joy again, but also to the bad things, so we could notice and change. But first, let's start with a little exercise. So imagine the best day of your life. Try to really imagine where you are, who you're with, what you're doing. It doesn't have to be the very, very best day. It could be just a really good day. Try to imagine it with vividness and detail. So for me, a good day may be something like this. And I assume I'll be quite happy. Now imagine you wake up the next day and you experience the exact same day. The same experiences in the same order with the same people, you eat the same meals. And then you wake up the next day and you experience the same day. And you wake up the next day and you got it. It is Groundhog Day. What will happen is that the best day of your life will become mundane and boring. And in fact, we have some data to support this. So a few years ago, I worked with a large tourism company. We wanted to know what makes people happiest on vacation and when are they happiest. So we went to resorts and we surveyed people. The first thing we looked at is when are people happiest? So you want to guess? Who thinks people are happiest on the first day? Okay, we got 2 free. Second day? Quite a float. Free. Third day? Fourth day? Fifth day? Okay, you guys are good. So yeah, what we found is that people were happiest 43 hours into their vacation. So 43 hours gave them the time to settle in and focus on the fun. But from that point on, joy started dwindling. Now, don't get me wrong. They were still happy on day 87654, but not as much as they were on day 2. And we also asked them, hey, what was the best bit of your vacation? And there's one word that they used more than any other word, and it was the word first. The first view of the ocean, the first cocktail, the first time I built the sandcastle. Firsts were new and exciting. Now, the second view of the ocean was quite good, but it wasn't good as a first. The second cocktail, the third cocktail, even the fifth cocktail was quite good, but it wasn't good as that first cocktail. So the question is why? And the answer has a lot to do with habituation. So habituation is our tendency to respond less and less and less to things that are constant or that are frequent or change very, very gradually. So we have a diminishing physiological and emotional response to frequently repeated or constant stimuli. We just stop responding to those. So for example, imagine that you buy a new perfume and you spritz it on, and the smell is quite salient. And then you spritz it on the second day, maybe not as salient, and the third day, less so, and months goes by, and you can't even detect the scent any longer. Or imagine you walk into a room filled with cigarette smoke. Studies show that when you first enter, the smell can be quite overwhelming, but within 20 minutes, you actually cannot detect the smoke any longer. Or you have the AC in the background, and you don't even notice that continuous noise. So why is that? Well, neurons in our brain, they respond quite strongly to anything that is new, a new smell, a new noise, the temperature of the pool when you jump in. The neurons fire, telling the other neurons, hey, there's something going on here. They spread the information. So for example, an olfactory neuron may tell a motor neuron that there is a funny smell here and we might want to move away. But after a while, if nothing changes in the environment, the neuron just stops responding. And if it doesn't stop on its own, there is inhibitory neurons that will tell that neuron, okay, quiet down, we've heard you already. And just as we stop responding to a smell or a sound, we also stop responding to the view of the ocean or to more complex events in our life and in society, such as a new love or a promotion. So the question is this habituation a good thing or is it a bad thing? And the answer is yes. So on the positive side, habituation ensures that we are motivated, right? If you think back to your first entry-level job, you probably were quite excited and happy about this entry-level job. But what would happen if you continue being as excited and as happy about this entry-level job 10 years in? You wouldn't be motivated to go after the next job, right? To go after that promotion. So habituation ensures that we progress, that we want to move forward. It is also important for our survival. We stop responding to things that are constant around us so we can have more resources to respond to new things that are coming our way that may need some response, some action. And finally, we know that problems in habituation are related to a whole range of mental health problems. Let me give you one example. Aaron Heller from the University of Miami showed that people who habituate to negative events slower tend to have depression symptoms. What he did, he asked students who just got their grade on a really important exam how they were feeling. And then he asked them again how they were feeling every 45 minutes for the rest of the day. What he found was that people who got a bad grade, they all felt really bad. It didn't matter if they had a history of depression or they did not. Everyone felt bad to the same extent. The difference was how fast people bounced back. People with depression or a history of depression, they tended to bounce back much slower. They kept ruminating on that bad grade. While people without a history of depression, they bounce back quite fast. However, on the other hand, habituation also means that we don't feel the joy of the good things around us because they've always been there, and we don't feel the gratitude. And on the other hand, we stop noticing the suboptimal things around us, which we could perhaps change. So the challenge really is, how do we regain sensitivity, both to the good things and to the bad things? How can we dishabituate? So let's start with dishabituating to the good. And really the key here is this wonderful quote by the economist Tibor Skytowski. He says, pleasure results from incomplete and intermittent satisfaction of desires. This is so good, I'm going to repeat it. Pleasure results from incomplete and intermittent satisfaction of desires. To show you what he means, let me tell you about this really interesting experiment. So think about a song that you really like. My question for you is, would you rather listen to this song from beginning to end, no interruptions, or would you rather have breaks in the song? Every 20 seconds or so, there will be a small break. Who wants no interruptions? Okay, who would like a break? Pretty much no one. So your opinion is the same as the people who were surveyed. 99% of the individuals said, I don't want any breaks. I want to listen to the song from beginning to end. However, when the experiment was done, to the surprise of everyone, those individuals who listened to the song with breaks actually enjoyed it more, and they were willing to pay double to listen to the music in concert. Why is that? Well, if we listen to the music from beginning to end, no interruptions, the joy is quite high, the pleasure is high at the beginning, but like those vacations, it starts dwindling over time. But if you have a break, what happens is that you dishabituate, and every time the song comes back on, you jump back, your joy jumps back. So overall, you experience more pleasure with breaks. So we may want to think about breaking up the good experiences into bits. In the same study, they also showed that people who had a massage with breaks enjoyed it more than people who had the massage without interruptions. Or we might think about having more frequent holidays, vacations, but shorter ones, rather than having a long one in order to experience more of those 43-hour peaks, right? More of those firsts. And we might also think about breaking up just our regular life. It is often the case when people leave their regular environment, their home for a while, perhaps for a business trip for a week or so, and then they come back, they find that their regular environment has resparkled. They can see their home life in fresh eyes. There is this wonderful quote from Jodie Foster when she talks about how she was on location for 6 months, and then she came back home. And this is what happened when she got back home. She says, "I came back from somewhere that is amazing and beautiful, but you know, you long for really dumb things that you've just used to, that 6 months ago I'm sure I was bored by, but right now I'm like, my God, avocados are amazing." Or, "I'm so glad I get to go to the gym again." Things that 6 months ago were sort of what I was trying to escape from, now everything is amazing. So, of course, Jodie Foster is not your average human being, and her experiences are not those of the average human being, but I think in this case, her insight actually reflects a fundamental feature of the regular average human experience, which is when we break away and we come back, we can see things differently. So we might want to think about breaking up the good things into bits. However, if we need to complete an unpleasant task like household chores or admin work, we actually want to do them in one go, not have breaks. Because if we have them in one go, then the habituation to the negative will actually help us motor through. So we want to swallow the bad whole, but break up the good things into bits in order to enhance pleasure. But of course, pleasure is not the only thing that is important for life. And so let's spend a few minutes to think about what makes up a good life. So when you ask people what makes up a good life, the most common question is happiness. We want to be happy, we want to feel joy, we don't want to be sad. But that's not everything. People also say they want a meaningful life. They want their work to have purpose. But things that elicit both happiness and a sense of purpose tend to do so less and less over time because of habituation. So for example, you may spend years in cancer research, and the feeling of purpose and awe that was once there may change into a sense of just routine. However, there's a third ingredient of a good life that can actually stop habituation, cause us to dishabituate, and that is variety. So shaking up our days causes us to dishabituate and therefore enhances the sense of happiness and of meaning. People who have diversified their lives, for example, they may have lived in different places, worked on different projects, interact with the diverse individuals, they tend to experience a more psychologically rich life. Because what variety does is it puts us in a state of learning. We have to learn about our new environment, we have to learn about the hierarchy, about the different people that we're interacting with. And studies show that people find pleasure in seeing themselves as learning, as progressing, as moving forward. One example, a study conducted by Rutledge and Blaine, they found that when people had to complete a task, which they did the task, and if they did it well, they got money, they were quite happy when they got the monetary reward. But in fact, they were happiest when they learned something new about the task. Learning actually elicited more joy than material goods. Material goods are always in front of us, so we tend to habituate over time. But learning is, by definition, change, and we can't habituate to change. And so, all else being equal, change can actually do us good. And this was shown by an experiment by Stephen Levitt. What Stephen did, he asked people to go online and to write down something that they were considering to change. It could be small, like the color of your hair, or it could be big, like exiting or entering a relationship. And then he had people flip a virtual coin. And he said, if it's heads, go ahead and make the change. If it's tails, stay with the status quo. And then he came back to them 2 weeks later and 6 months later. What he found is, first of all, those people who got heads were indeed 25% more likely to go ahead with a change. Most importantly, those who actually went ahead with a change were happier on average, both 2 weeks later and 6 months later. And so what this suggests that all else being equal, change can actually enhance well-being. But we tend to not have as much change as we should, because change and diversification is actually difficult, right? It means moving out of our comfort zone. And that can be aversive in the short run, but it can have huge benefits for the long run. So we want to consider diversifying our life, maybe taking a course in a field that is outside of our own, learning a new skill, moving to different places. And we can do that in our personal life, but also in our professional life. For example, in many companies and in academia, people will actually rotate between departments. And that will not only enhance people's well-being, but studies show that that also enhances creativity. For example, a study by Kelly Main showed that even small changes to your environment, for example, being in the office and then moving to a coffee shop, being in the office, going for a walk, then coming back, enhances creativity. So truth be told, the boost that she found for creativity only lasts for 6 minutes every time that people made a change. However, those 6 minutes could be the important ones, right? That's when you can find that solution, come up with a new idea. Okay, so we talked quite a bit about habituating to the good stuff and dishabituating to the good stuff. Let's take a sharp turn and talk about dishabituating to the bad stuff. So there is a sense that we get used to negative things around us, whether it's misinformation online or rudeness online, whether it is fraud. We get used to these things, and so we may not try to change them. And so let's start by thinking about how we habituate to our own not-so-great behavior. A study conducted in my lab a few years ago found that people habituate to their own dishonesty. We had people come into our lab, and they played a game in which they could gain more money at the expense of another person if they lied. We didn't tell them to lie, but that was how the game was set up. What we found was that at the beginning, people lied by just little amounts, perhaps a few cents. But over time, they lied by larger and larger and larger and larger amounts. Their lying snowballed. At the same time, we recorded their brain activity. And what we found is, at the beginning when they lied, there was a strong reaction in the amygdala, which is important for emotional arousal. So we have amygdala in each side of our brain. It's about the size of a cherry tomato. And at the beginning, the amygdala was quite responsive. But over time, as people lied more and more and more, the amygdala response actually went down. It habituated. People got used to their own lying, and so they didn't feel as bad about it. And the more the amygdala response went down, the more lying went up on the next attempt that they had the opportunity to lie. So it seems that emotional habituation leads to dishonesty escalation. And so the suggestion is that we really want to nip lying and dishonesty in the bud, whether it is at home with our children or maybe in the workplace. If we call out even small acts of dishonesty, that could actually stop the larger incidents from happening in the future. And so emotional habituation could lead to dishonesty escalation, but we also found that it leads to risk escalation. So if you think back to something that you did that was quite scary, perhaps when you were a child and you had to jump into the pool for the very first time and you felt really scared, but finally you jump in, and what happens is the next time you jump, you're not as scared, right? So you jump maybe faster, maybe stronger, and then after a while, you're jumping head first. What we found is those individuals whose emotional habituation is quicker, they tend to take more risk in real life, and the risk escalates faster. To do this, what we wanted to do is put people in real physical threat, so they're really, really, really scared. But of course, we're not allowed to do that. And so we did the second best thing, is we used virtual reality. We had people play a virtual game where they go up in a really tall building, skyrise building, and then the doors open, and then they can walk on a plank up high in the building. So they look down, and there's little cars, they look up, and there's birds, and I suspect that most of you have tried virtual reality, so you know how intriguing it is that despite the fact that your brain knows that you're on the ground, right, in your office, it is also at the same time absolutely tricked to believe that you might die if you take a step, right? And it's really, really scary, surprisingly so. And so what we found is that at the beginning, when people took a first step, they just did one little step. But the next time when they came up, they maybe did 2 steps, and the next time 3 steps. And at the beginning, we asked them all the time how they were feeling. We also measured their skin conductance response. So when you're anxious, you sweat, and your skin conductance response goes up. And we found at the beginning they were very, very anxious, but with repetition, they became less and less and less and less anxious. And as they became less and less and less anxious, they took more and more and more virtual risk, meaning they stepped further away on the plank until finally at some point, after many repetitions, they jumped off. But what was interesting is those individuals whose anxiety habituated faster were the ones who took more risk much faster virtually, but they are also those people who told us in a questionnaire that they tend to take more risk in real life, whether it is extreme sport, unsafe sex, financial risk. So emotional habituation leads to risk escalation. Now, sometimes risk-taking is good, but a lot of times we actually want to reduce risk, right, in order to reduce, for example, accidents. And so how can we do that? Well, what we want to do is to dishabituate people, right, to induce the fear again so people are more cautious. And how do we dishabituate? We change things up, right? We shake it up. We need to change our environment, change the rules in order to get people to dishabituate. Let me give you a very specific example. So on the 3rd of September 1967 in Sweden at 4:50 a.m., all traffic stopped and people moved from driving on the left side to driving on the right side. So Sweden did that because they wanted to align itself with the other Scandinavian countries around it. But of course, the fear was that that will result in many accidents, right? I don't know if you tried it, but it's very hard to switch the side of the road that you're driving in. But to the surprise of everyone, accidents went down by 40%, which is huge. So why is that? Well, if you've been driving for a while, you no longer feel scared, right? You feel quite comfortable, and you don't pay as much attention, and you might take more risk. But now you change the rules, anxiety, fear is triggered again, people attend more, and therefore they are more careful. Over time, of course, they habituated, and 2 years later, accidents went back to baseline. Here's another example. If you see these warning signs on a cigarette packet, they may induce an emotional reaction. But if you see the same warning signs again and again and again, you habituate less of a reaction and less of an impact. And so the FDA actually recommends that these warnings be rotated every so often in order to dishabituate people so they feel the emotion and it has more of an impact. So let me kind of end on this. We're not necessarily aware of how our brain works. We're not necessarily aware of how fast we habituate and what the consequences are. But if we become aware, then we can take actions to both enhance our well-being and also to perhaps notice and change the less great things around us, so we would like to do so. And often when I tell people about this kind of work, they ask, well, now that I'm aware of habituation, does that mean that it will go away? And the answer is no, it will not go away, but we can take actions, right, to reduce it. And it's similar to knowing about any other trick that our brain plays on us. Knowing about those tricks doesn't make them go away. And I'm going to just end with this demonstration from a very different domain of a trick that our brain plays on us that makes this clear. So what does this look like? Have you seen this one before? It's an upside down photo of Adele, the singer. Okay, now let's see what happens when we see it upright. So when we see this upside down, it looks perfectly fine, right? But when we see it upright, it's clear that something is wrong. Why is that? Our brain observes upright faces all the time, thousands a day. So it has evolved to detect anything that is slightly wrong in an upright face. But we don't really see upside down faces very much, and so we are unable to detect these things when in upside down faces. This, by the way, is called the Thatcher illusion because it was first demonstrated on former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who wasn't known for her smiles. And if you want to do it at home, what you need to do is cut the eyes and the mouth, rotate them, and paste it back. What is the point of this? The point of this is to show you that despite the fact that I just explained it to you, the mechanism, why it works, and so on, the trick is still there. It hasn't even probably diminished much at all. And so the same thing is with the other kind of illusions and tricks that our brain plays on us. They won't go away, but knowing about them means that we could perhaps change our actions in ways that are useful. Great, so thank you so much, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about some other parts of the book now. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Tali. This was such a great presentation. So I was really struck me while I was reading this book how habituation and dishabituation really touches pretty much all aspects of individual behavior and also society. I was wondering if that had occurred to you as the inspiration of this book, or that was something you sort of discovered more organically as you were writing the book with Cass.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's fundamental, and you know, we think about it, it's even as fundamental as DNA. And really, the book started with the dishonesty experiment that I just described. So that was the first experiment that we did in 2016 about how people habituate to their own dishonesty. And it came out just a few months before the presidential election, which was Trump versus Clinton. And so it really got a lot of attention. People kind of, you know, saw it as an explanation of different things that were going on. And so it was clear that people were not really aware of this phenomena and how it can impact our actions, how it can impact our feelings. And I knew that it goes beyond just dishonesty and lying. And so there was, you know, a lot to cover, which the book does, a lot of different things. We go on, you know, we talk about social media and pollution and misinformation and other things which I didn't have quite time to describe.
Yeah, it made me think about all these aspects of my individual life and the daily decisions I make. And one thing that it sort of hit home for me about, just as an anecdote, is when I'm watching television, I noticed that I actually liked it more with the commercial breaks. And I always assumed that it was like, oh, I'm just ADD, I multitask too much, and like, so I just needed a break or whatever. But now I'm starting to think about that there's like something even more deeper about habituation and dishabituation going on, that the brain actually wants me to space it out a little bit, so that variety helps.
Yeah, so I think that's what the data suggests. I don't know if an experiment that was done with commercials, but according to the other experiments that I just talked about, that would be the conclusion. What's amazing is that you were able to consciously become aware of this yourself, because in all the studies, people are not aware of this. So they always say, you know, I want the good stuff without breaks. and they always say, I want the bad stuff with breaks, right? And in fact, for example, there was another study where there was really annoying noise, and they asked people, would you like a break every so often, or just listen to the whole thing at once? And people want breaks from the annoying noise, but of course, they suffered more because the breaks disrupted the habituation. So I think you might be unique in being able to detect these effects.
In that sense, yes, but on the dishabituation side, I definitely, when I'm doing something unpleasant, want to stop immediately. So
you want to stop, right?
I want to stop. So, and that really resonated with me too. I think one of my biggest takeaways is that actually that's the wrong approach. When you're doing something that's unpleasant or boring or dull or repetitive, actually, the more you do it, the easier it is to get yourself in the mindset to do it, and that's better than like prolonging the distress or whatever. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's a message.
Yeah, and relatedly, it made me think too about the whole concept of like too much of a good thing is actually not what you really want, even though it may seem that way. So I love that experiment that you did in the book with macaroni and cheese. One of the things that I've liked the most about being an adult is, I can eat for dinner whatever I want every night. And so you did this study, right, where you were having people eat macaroni and cheese every day.
It's not mine. We just describe it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry.
So the study that we described is quite a simple one, and I think it's also intuitive. So they had two groups. One group ate macaroni and cheese every single day, and the other group had macaroni and cheese once a week. And the people who had it every day obviously got fed up with macaroni and cheese faster than the people who had it every week. I think it's intuitive for us, although you're right, there are a lot of things that we just would rather do a lot of. I mean, definitely if I would ask if my children, would you like your favorite dish every day, they would say yes, rather than, just once a week. But the good news about it, the people who had macaroni and cheese every single day, because they liked it less over time, they ate less, so they lost more weight than the people who had macaroni and cheese once a week. They had like a different dish every day of the week.
That was the interesting counterintuitive thing. Maybe actually in the long run, overdoing it may be better for your long-term physical health.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, if you're going to choose to eat the same dish every day, probably not macaroni and cheese.
Yeah, exactly. So I was curious on something you touched on a little bit in your talk about some people tend to habituate more quickly or more easily to novel situations than other people. I was wondering if you'd talk a little bit more about the factors that play into that, like what makes somebody more apt to habituate more quickly than somebody else?
Yeah, okay, so there are individual differences. Maybe I'll kind of talk a little bit about the individual differences and what are the consequences, because I think the reason is mostly genetic. But it's interesting. So there's individual differences, and on one hand, it's shown that people who habituate slower are actually more creative. So there's a study that was done where they found that people who are creative, they actually did things like they have a patent under their name, they wrote a book, they have an art exhibition. Those individuals tended to habituate slower. The way that they measured habituation is they used an auditory stimuli. You could use anything, but they had the same kind of like noise again and again and again. They're measured physiological response, and that's how they measured how fast people habituate. So do you continue responding or not? And that's what they found. And the question is, therefore, why does slow habituation, why is that related to creativity? And I think the reason is, if you habituate slower, you keep more information in your mind, right? These sounds and smells and images and bits of information and knowledge are in your mind for longer. It could be very distracting on one hand, but it also means that these unexpected combinations will happen in your mind, right? Little bits of information that usually don't come together will suddenly collide and create this new idea. And so the question, I guess, for everyone is then, well, how do we induce dishabituation, meaning slower habituation or dishabituation, in order to enhance creativity? And I think the answer is what I talked about before, is changing your environment. Because by changing your environment, even simple things, going out of your office, you are dishabituating, right? You're creating a dishabituation. So you're able to, things are just like different around you. And I find this in my own experience. If I think about all the times that I got the ideas that then would lead to really important routes in my career, or like a solution that I found, in In every case, it was not in front of my computer trying to figure out the solution. It was actually, I left my office or I did something else. So for example, one time I was really working on this problem, I couldn't figure it out, and so I just left and walked to the gym. And this was within the 6 minutes, you know, I said it's like 6 minutes. Within that 6 minutes, before I even reached the gym, without even consciously thinking about the problem, the solution arose, right? And then I remember I called my student, and that led to years of research. That was like a really important thing that occurred to me. Or another time I was in a conference, and I was listening to these talks, so all this information kind of gathers in my mind, but it wasn't until later that this was in San Francisco, so later I went to Napa, and I was like sitting around the wineries, not consciously thinking about that, but that's when this kind of soup in my mind led to a new idea that again would lead, in that case, to my PhD dissertation. So I think this is quite a common experience. And I guess we can do more of it, just like get out and go for a run, go for a walk and come back.
Yeah, and as sort of a corollary to that, you talk in the book in one of the later chapters about dishabituation entrepreneurs and how other people can sort of trigger dishabituation in others. So some people are in the forefront of that more. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, so in that chapter, which we talk about how we habituate to a lot of the negative stuff around us, whether it's racism or sexism and things like that, and that because if things are just constantly like that, we tend to maybe not notice them as much. Mm-hmm. And definitely I find this is a case when I think back to maybe like 20 years ago, right, working in academia. I mean, even now there's like sexism and things like that, but definitely then it was much more of it, but because there's so much of it, it was just the norm, right? And so you were less likely to call things out. And so because it's a norm, you habituate, you think, oh, that's just how things are. And that's the response of the majority of individuals. But then there's interesting because some people actually don't habituate, right? And not only don't they dehabituate, they actually call things out to make other people dishabituate. So we call these individuals dishabituated entrepreneurs. And of course, there are famous examples of these people. But there's also, maybe I'll call one example. So in terms of sexism within academia, there is a professor at Princeton, her name is Yael Neeve, and what she decided to do is she wanted people to dishabituate, for example, to the ratio of male and female speakers that is usually unbalanced, right? And so the way that she did it, she created a website, and this is specifically in neuroscience, but it can be in anything else, where she put in all the conferences that she was aware of, and for every one, she wrote what the ratio was of speakers, male and female, and what the ratio was in that actual discipline, right? And so, and importantly, the names of the people who organized the conference. And so now, first of all, it became clear, right? If the ratio in the population is maybe like 4 to 6 or something, but the speakers are like 1 to 5, that's a problem, right? And so what people, first of all, it became very apparent, and second of all, no one wants their name associated with such data, right? So basically what she did, she gathered the data, she made that data visible to other people, and there's accountability.
That's great. It's really inspiring that one person can make a real difference by making things visible that people who have habituated may not have seen. Even people, I think you said in one of the research studies, if you're the subject of bias or discrimination, you still habituate to it even a little bit. I think the study said less so than people who aren't subject to it, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think even if you are the one who's biased against, you will habituate to that. But I think the difference here is that, let's take, for example, female pilots. So perhaps there's this bias that males are better at being able to control large equipment. Perhaps there's a bias like that. And perhaps these female pilots also, to some extent, habituated or took that as a norm. But the difference is that they have the experience of actually controlling this big machine, right? So on one hand, they have these expectations from the population that perhaps they shouldn't be as good. On the other hand, they are performing well. And so what happens is what we call in neuroscience a prediction error. there's a difference between your prediction or what you expect and the actual reality or the outcome. So for them, there's all these prediction errors being like, oh, this is not quite right. I can see that what I'm doing is better than what perhaps I expect from what the rest of the population tells me. And I think those, what we call prediction errors, will then make us less likely to habituate.
That's great. Are there any personal life hacks that you've taken up to take advantage of dishabituation in your everyday life? I know you talked a little bit about creativity, so maybe that's one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a dishabituation junkie. I live in different places, I work on different things, and so that's kind of fits what I do. But I think one interesting thing is there's like a whole chapter about social media and how social media is a little bit like this AC in the background, where you kind of suspect that something is not so good for you or something is causing you a little bit of anxiety, but you don't really know for sure and you can't detect it because it's always in the background. So you know how there's an AC and then someone turns it off and then you're like, whew, that feels so much better because the noise was bothering me, but I didn't realize until someone turned it off. And I think social media is a little bit like that, where it can cause some anxiety, but we don't know it until we shut it down, until we take a break. And so there's wonderful studies that we quote in the book about how when people do take a break from social media, actually it's been shown that well-being is enhanced to a great extent. One study was conducted by the economist Hans Alcott, where he took two groups of individuals, 100 in each group, and he gave each person $1,000. One group was given, it's 1,000 in groups, $100 each. And for one group, he asked them to quit Facebook for a month, and the other group just go on with what you're doing. And what he found at the end of the month, that those who quit Facebook, and so this was an old experiment, so it was done on Facebook. Those who quit Facebook were happier in every dimension: less depression, less anxiety, better well-being. They spent more time reading, playing the piano, socializing in real life. So they were happy, and they didn't expect it to be such a big effect. So people were quite surprised by this impact. And also interestingly, despite the fact that most people said, oh, I'm feeling so much better and it's surprising, I didn't expect it, at the end of the month, most went straight back to Facebook. So, but at least I would say they were informed, right? It's more of an informed decision.
At least you have that perspective, right? Yeah. So I think we're going to transition over to audience questions. So we have both some online questions, and also if you have a question in the room, please feel free to come down to the mic. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Tali. Thanks for joining us. I was curious, how much have you studied this concept of habituation, dishabituation in regard to aging? Like, have you found that the rate at which someone can habituate changes at a constant rate as they age? How much is that correlated with habituation and dishabituation?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question, and I have to say I don't know what the answer is to that. We do talk a little bit about age and habituation and dishabituation in the book in terms of trying to explain the midlife crisis. So there's the well-known phenomena, which is happiness over life follows a U-shape. So happiness is quite high in teenagers and kids, and then it goes down, 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 reaches rock bottom in your midlife. So that's between like 40, 50, 60. But the good news, it actually goes back up then, and actually continues to climb back up until the last couple of years of life. And so in trying to explain why there's this dip in happiness in midlife, I think one speculation that we had is that is the time of least change, right? That is a time where family life usually is kind of the same. You perhaps are at the peak of your professional life, but it is stable. There is the minimum, perhaps, on average, amount of learning, right? There's a lot of learning and change going on beforehand. And counterintuitively, there is learning and change going later when you retire, when your kids leave the house, and so on. And it could be daunting, but it means that you have to try to figure out your new life, right? And it's that midlife part where things are just the same. And we think that was one of the reasons why happiness is lowest, suicide rates for males, white males is highest. But that's a good question, and I'd have to look that, because that's really interesting.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to take one online first? Or?
No, please go ahead. We'll do online next.
So first off, thanks so much for being here and giving that presentation. That was super interesting. One of the questions that arose for me during your talk was, is there a noticeable, significant difference between self-initiated changes and externally triggered changes? Like, for example, with the happiness is bigger in listening to your favorite song if you break it up. Do I get to press the pause button as long as I hit the pause button often enough? Or does someone else press the pause button, and does that impact my joy in this?
Mm-hmm. So I think the impact of the break itself on habituation and on joy is probably the same. However, I think overall, people would probably get more joy and enhance their well-being if they make the change themselves. And that is because of the different literature about the importance of control and the importance of making your own choice. So there's a lot of studies, and actually we've done a few of these studies as well, showing that control and choice in and of itself has value. So even if you're going to choose something, which is exactly the same thing that I will choose for you, you will enjoy that something more if you chose it yourself. So I think that kind of is the added value of doing it yourself. And in fact, that is the added value, I guess, of awareness. Because now if people can realize that and try that themselves.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
We'll do an online question next. So, hi, Tali. Thanks so much for giving this talk. If you haven't already, can you speak to the relationship between boredom and frustration, especially how to avoid the frustration that can lead to burnout?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if this is what the person had in mind, but in fact, we're doing some research now, which I didn't think about so much in relation to habituation, but we are looking at boredom and frustration in terms of the idea that we're usually bored because there is a minimal amount to learn and we're not getting new information, right? That's usually boredom. We're just doing the same thing. There's no information, no learning. And we also, on the other hand, get frustrated when things are so complex that we can't learn. There's too much information, right? And it is that middle ground, and this is actually a known phenomena, where you are most engaged and you are most happy in that middle ground where there is information, there is learning, but it is in the extent that is doable, right? So you're not on the edge. So I think boredom is one part of the scale, and then frustration is the other part of the scale.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. Hi, Tali. Thanks so much for being here. I think this idea of dishabituation it kind of flies in the face of so much of what I focus on here too. And I'm in sales, and we look at habits and highly effective habits, atomic habits. You know, there's a lot of those books out there. So I can see where it's great for creativity. Is there a push and pull on how it can affect productivity? And is there any studies done in the balance of that?
Right. So absolutely. It's not that habits are a bad thing, right? Habits are very, very, very important. And I'm sure that the people who study habits also would not suggest that you should do the same thing over and over and over always. So in any of these kind of like psychological insights, we always have to remember that there's our mind and our brain is kind of the product of many complex rules and codes, right? If you think about like all the code that goes behind Google, right? Think about that. There's a lot of different rules, a lot of different things. So it's the same with our mind. There's a lot of different rules and different processes that go on. So it's not a one thing that is always true in all circumstances for all. The question is like, what is your goal? What is the context? So even taking something simple like physical activity, like working out. So on one hand, habits are really good for working out. It's good to like go in the same time of day because then you're more likely to do it. On the other hand, if you do the same thing every time in the gym, the outcome will be lower, right? So it's always a kind of a combination, and it matters what the context is and what the goal is.
Yep. That makes sense.
Yeah, but I think because habits has been such a huge thing lately, because partially because of atomic habits, it's good to also kind of look at the other side of the coin.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, we'll go over here.
Hey, Tali, thank you so much for the talk. I want to go back to the workout questions. What are some ways that you recommend to consciously reset habituation level for good habits? And besides varying up the varieties, because sometimes, working out, there is only so much equipment in the gym, so much exercise you can do. What are some ways to, help resetting that level of habituation?
So resetting, like dishabituation in the context of like working out, how do we dishabituate? Okay, interesting question. Well, I mean, again, as I said before, I think you need this kind of combination of habits and new things, but I think the obvious answer is trying new things, not always doing the same thing, right? So you might do cycling and swimming and running, but try a few things that you like, but also just like what else you're doing at the same time, right? What are you listening to? Who are you working out with? Things like that. So it is known that there is also physical habituation, like the actual impact on our muscles. If you do the same thing over and over and over again, it has less of an impact. So I think that's all I have to say about working out. Although it's something I love to do, but not an expert. Thank you.
Hi, Tali. Thank you so much for this talk. It's been wonderful. My question is more around the dishabituation and sensitivity to bad things. So there's so much going on in the world today, and I think we are becoming so desensitized. How would you recommend that we change that in our own personal lives and wider in society to ensure that we're not becoming habituated to all of the negative and things that are happening across the world today?
Yeah, and I mean, that's really difficult, of course, and there's not one easy solution to it. And actually, we just wrote an op-ed about this. It came out a couple of days ago in the New York Times. So what we talk about there is first, showing the evidence that we are habituating to negative things, and people do habituate to negative things. And even if you look back, to World War II, the habituation of people on both sides, both the victims, but both the people, for example, Nazis, there is a lot of documentation of people actually talking about how things change really slowly. It changed so gradually that they couldn't even see it anymore, right? There's just wonderful quotes about people saying, it's kind of like you're in a field and you suddenly, the corn is so high, right? You didn't see it growing. And there isn't an easy solution. Part of the things that we talk about is what Stuart Mill calls experiments in living, which means that we can't really know what is good for our life or for society if we are just trying the same things, if we're just doing the same things over and over without trying things differently. And nowadays, it is easier both to experiment in our own life. You could do easy things like, for example, travel to different countries, see how things are in a totally different type of government, totally different culture. Back in the day, if you look, a long time ago, it wouldn't have been that easy because we used to live in relatively small environments where everyone spoke the same language, had the same habits and culture and so on, so it wouldn't be that easy. But nowadays we could do that. We could do that online. We can do it with interacting with different people. So what we suggest that some of that is helpful. I think a lot of people in comments to that article, they actually said, yes, I had the experience of, for example, living in Sweden, and how in Sweden the whole government is set up completely different, and that opened their eyes about how things are back here in the US, right? So I think that's helpful, and you can do it by physically experimenting in different types of living, but also from taking other people's point of view, whether it is reading books, films, arts, and yeah, so that is the kind of things that we talk about. It's not like a pill that's going to solve everything.
All right. Thank you so much.
So we have one online question, looks like one more in person. Let's see if we can squeeze them both in really quick. I have young children myself and would like some advice on how to spot habituation in young children and what is safe to teach them to look out for.
Yeah, I think my intuition is that habituation is probably not as common. I mean, everyone habituates. But because for children everything is new, right? Things that we already got used to, I feel like for children everything is new. And so they probably experience less habituation than adults do. Of course, if you put them in the same exact, if they hear the same auditory signal over and over, they will habituate as well. But my kind of point is that for them, life is much more diverse because everything that they experience for the first time, and so they react to it more. And you can see it, right? You can see that the reaction is always greater. Curiosity is so much greater as well. And what is safe to teach them to look out for them? Oh, and I'm not sure if this is what she means in terms, or it might be a him, I can't say without my glasses. But in terms of safe, it may be that what he is referring to, because I talk a little bit about the book about risk habituation. And in fact, I give children as an example, as I did in the talk as well, where kids will try out things, right? They can go to the playground and they'll jump off for the first time off of something and they're really scared, but then like four tries later, they're like jumping all over the place, especially if you're like my son. And I think one recommendation is perhaps let them hurt themselves a little bit before they get to the really dangerous part. Because if there is a negative outcome, that will then break the habituation. And if in terms of dishonesty and lying, the advice is actually to call them out even for the little things in order to not let them habituate to those kind of negative experiences.
That's great advice.
Thank you. Thanks for a great talk. I'll try to be quick. Yeah, so at the beginning you talked about how dishabituation can help kind of promote intermittent and incomplete feedback. I think the social media example is interesting because I would argue that intermittent and incomplete feedback is kind of the core of the design of social media. And so how would you argue we can best differentiate between seeking that feedback in ways that are positive, and you gave a lot of examples of that, versus in ways that can be harmful with things like social media and other addictive things that are so hard to disengage from because they provide that kind of unpredictable reward?
So it's intermittent pleasure rather than feedback, because feedback can be positive and negative. The quote is about
sure. I would argue for social media, it definitely can be positive when someone likes a photo.
Yeah. But just to make sure that it was about pleasure. Right. So yeah, definitely for social media, you can get positive feedback, right? You're posting something and you get all these likes and reposts, and studies show that when that happens, people go back again. At the same time, you could log in and it can cause negative feelings because, for example, you're seeing, the posts of other people about all their successes, whether they're true or not true, and that can make you feel worse about yourself. And so in this case, in fact, the negative feelings don't habituate because you're going back and you're leaving, you're going back and you're leaving. We talk a little bit about, it seems that for a lot of people, social media can be a little bit addictive. And I think that is partially the explanation of those individuals who were in the experiment that felt better after a month of not being in Facebook, but then went back. And two characteristics of addiction is, one, the more you do it, the more you do it. So even if it's negative, even if every time that you log in, you feel a little bit anxious, a little bit kind of sad, when you're not on, people have the feeling that they need to be on. And the more they're on, the more they have the feeling they need to be on when they're not on. So that's the more you do it, the more you do it. And the second thing is, another feature of addiction is that you have this drive of engaging with a stimulus, despite the fact that you don't enjoy it, don't like it. In neuroscience, we have this distinction between liking and wanting. So liking is kind of the pleasure feeling that you have, and wanting is this drive of taking an action and engaging. And I think with social media, for some people, when they engage, they don't have the liking, they don't enjoy it, but they still have the drive to go back. And so those features can lead to addiction in some individuals.
Great, thank you.
I think we're at time. Thank you all so much for attending, and please be sure to pick up a copy of Tali's new book, Look Again. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.